like many of us, I think I'm disappointed that we're not all together in person. And I know I'd been so much looking forward to getting to Singapore. I was in Singapore just not for work. Maybe it was about, oh gosh, 8 or 10 years ago. My wife and I spent maybe 3 days just wandering around the city, eating the incredible food, just really soaking in the city and loved it. And so I was so looking forward to being back. But if it's not meant to be in 2020, perhaps in the coming years, I'll be able to come back because it is just such a wonderful place. Or that's been my experience so far. So yeah, and thank you again just for the wonderful introduction. I do so much work with young people, you know, again, adolescents, kids who are a little bit younger, working a lot with university students as well. And one of the things I think that we're all probably seeing is this just explosion in mental health issues among our young people. I was looking at this particularly when I was working in the university setting, and I'll talk about that, just seeing this, you know, students dropping out of university all over the place. And then looking at teenagers and just seeing what a difficult time they've been having. And then even younger than teenagers is where we actually need to start to really give kids the resilience skills through mindfulness, of course, and other practices to help them through those difficult times. So many places in the world, I think we're doing an incredible job preparing kids cognitively, academically for really challenging high schools, universities, right? But we're not necessarily preparing them as well emotionally as we could be, and perhaps even as well as we have in the past. And so we're seeing just kids really start to fall apart as they get into those teen years and beyond. And we know that anxiety, if it's not treated and not managed effectively in adolescence, it's going to lead to other problems down the road. It's going to lead to addiction. It's going to lead to depression. It's going to lead to all kinds of interpersonal challenges, right? And a lot of folks coming out sideways as anger and frustration. And so the more we can find ways to prevent anxiety from arising, and then to teach young people how to manage anxiety while they're experiencing it, you know, to me, the better. And so we'll be exploring that a little bit today. And I also just, of course, want to acknowledge the pandemic that we're in, which clearly we'd be together in person, right? And just what a toll this has taken on all of us, on, you know, particularly our young people, particularly our adolescents who so much need the socialization that school, that social time offers them is so important for them developmentally. It's also so important for them socially and emotionally to learn how to build more resilience, to learn how to manage their anxiety as well as all of their difficult emotions and mental health challenges that much more effectively. And it's just being exacerbated so much by this pandemic. You know, I have to say, I'm not seeing, when I talk to my patients, I'm not seeing as much anxiety in some ways as I thought that I would, or worry about the pandemic. But I am seeing a lot of loneliness, a lot of depression, a lot of sadness. And I think all of these things are just amping up the stress, which at the same time is also, of course, amping up the anxiety. And we know that anxiety is going to not just, of course, impact the mental health of our kids, but it's also going to impact their ability to learn. So we'll talk actually about how the stress and anxiety response actually inhibits our brains from functioning the way we want them to function, from being able to focus, from being able to you know, concentrate on difficult things, from being more creative, from taking perspective. So all of these things are just so damaging and devastating. So with that, with that cheerful introduction, I thought that I would begin. Let's just open with a short practice. I'd like to do this workshop where we weave practices throughout, because that feels particularly important, that we maybe all end this hour or two together actually ourselves feeling a little bit less anxious, as well as walking away with some skills. So let's begin. I'll just invite you all to find a comfortable posture. Whatever a mindful postures for you, just upright, not too tight, not too loose. You'll probably be able to hear my kids in the background, just a warning. You can allow your eyes to close, and we'll take maybe 5 minutes to do this practice. And notice how you feel at the beginning of this. And just bring your attention to your breath, just beginning to extend your breath a little bit. Particularly extending that exhale. And I'll invite you to just bring to mind maybe a favorite place, a place where you feel relaxed, a place where you feel comfortable, empowered, maybe a vacation spot or a place from childhood. And with each breath, the image of this place can become a bit more clear, a bit more focused. And pretty soon, even in this favorite place, you may notice your mind begins to wander. Perhaps wandering to the past, earlier in the day, the past few months, and each thought about the past that enters this place in your mind, you can just imagine yourself taking that thought and just setting it down beside you, thought by thought. In the recent or the distant past, just setting those aside, clearing out the space in your mind. Or perhaps thoughts about the future. Or our worry often exists. The next hour or two, or the weeks or months ahead, just taking those thoughts about the future, setting them aside one by one. Clearing the space in your mind. Or perhaps it's your mind just going somewhere else altogether, wondering where your kids are, your students are. And just setting each thought aside. And taking now just a few more moments to continue clearing this space in your mind. And I'll ring the bell. You can just allow your eyes to flutter open, taking a look around the room. Maybe just noticing, if you can notice all the corners in the room to ground yourself. Maybe looking at the colors in the room, maybe noticing reds, oranges, yellows, greens, blues. And just pressing your feet into the ground and bring your awareness, your attention back to the screen. And here we are in late August. in Singapore, wherever you find yourself. Maybe some folks are from all over the place. So welcome back. This is a simple practice called clearing a space. It comes out of the tradition called focusing, and developed by Eugene Gendlin. And I think this is a useful one because it really helps us, right, kind of let go of the past, right, which is often for a lot of kids, especially those who are anxious, right, they're still feeling that shame or that regret. Did I say the wrong thing in the cafeteria? Oh my gosh, how did that test go last week? Or for some kids, right, something maybe even really difficult, some trauma or neglect from the past. Right? And inviting them to notice and open up to and let go of the future, which is where so many, right, difficult things often happen, right, is in the future. There's a famous American writer who said, I've experienced many terrible things in my life, only a few of which ever actually happened, right? And that to me really captures what anxiety is, right? It's these stories we tell ourselves about the future. So we practice simply setting them aside in this exercise, right? Or there's a fake meme that floats around online that says something like, you know, it says it's by like Lao Tzu, and sometimes it says it's by Buddha, right? But it says, right, depression is the past, anxiety is in the future, peace can only be found in the present. And I don't know who actually ever said it, right? But it really does reflect the fact that the present, we're actually okay. And we'll be talking about and working with how to get ourselves, how to help our kids get themselves back into the present. I also, you might notice at the end of that practice, I invited you just to open your eyes and to look around the room, notice the corners, something I sometimes say, notice colors, maybe notice something new you hadn't noticed before in the room. This also brings us right into the present and really grounds us. And for some kids, their anxiety, if they close their eyes and do a longer guided visualization, they really start to wander off. Kids who are maybe a bit dissociative with their anxiety because of trauma, it's really helpful to reground them. And even just that simple, you know, noticing where you are in Singapore in late August, just a little reminder like that, because some kids might be still finding their way back almost, right? So these kinds of things that I'm adding in are really not by accident. Just want to emphasize that. So again, that's a simple practice called clearing a space. And by the way, I just want to say, I put my email up. If people want a copy of these slides, I'm happy to send them to you with some of the scripts on them and that sort of thing as well. So I have this longstanding interest in mindfulness, going back 20 some years to the first time I really took a mindfulness course, mindfulness-based stress reduction, went on a retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh. But actually before that, I think back to experiences I'd had when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, of mindfulness before I even, heard that word mindfulness. And I think this is useful for us to reflect on, because sometimes the kids will be like, well, what is this new thing? I don't want to, this is weird, right? But I just think about things like walking quietly in the woods. And we're going to this nature camp, and my son actually now goes to the camp. Camps are open in the US. I don't know what things are like in Singapore, but the kids all wear masks and stay distant. It's outside. And they say, let's walk as quietly as we can in the woods. And if you've ever tried to walk without making a sound, it's a lot like mindful walking, because it requires so much focus on your footsteps, on the sensations of the ground, on the textures of the ground. Right? And that actually, right, really helps us to then focus right into the moment. Or we just quietly listen to sounds in the woods, right? Just noticing the trees whispering to each other, the sound of the wind, right? These kinds of things, almost playful, right? They're ways that maybe we can, you know, connect back to mindfulness in some way. So I think when we teach kids anything, especially teenagers, right, we want to start with, what do the kids already know? We want to build on existing knowledge, basically, right? So having a conversation about, right, what are times perhaps that you've felt at peace? What are times that you feel in the moment? What are times that you're able to let go of the past and the future? They fall away and you kind of are aware that you're doing it, so that it doesn't have to feel like we're suddenly introducing this new thing. And again, unfortunately, we're in this, I guess actually maybe people can use the chat box or something I could see. If you just want to let me know what your occupation is, if you're a teacher, if you're a parent, if you're a therapist, if you're a doctor or something else, I'd love to just get a rough sense of who people are. We can't do the raise your hand because we're not all in person. But again, kind of thinking about that. And the other thing that I really want to emphasize is that this really does start with us. So the best way to help our kids to learn how to settle down, to learn how to manage their anxiety, right, is through really at first starting with ourselves. So why don't I share this, throw this slide up here. Right, I think about how do we bring mindfulness to kids, especially anxious ones, right? They're not all going to be living mindfully, right? That's where we want to get to, right? But where we need to start is with our own practice of mindfulness. And then it starts to trickle down, right? We build a community of mindfulness in the adults, right? In the doctors, in the teachers, in the parents, in the therapists, and everybody else, and the coaches. Then we think about actually teaching this stuff to the kids. Then maybe they're practicing independently, and then maybe they're living a bit more mindfully, but it keeps starting with us. Right? So I get asked all the time, well, what's the best way to create more mindful students, right? What's the best way to create more mindful kids? And I thought about this for a number of years, and what became, oh, maybe we could, I don't even know how to do a poll. I'll have to figure that out for the next one. Thank you, it's great to see these comments. Right, well, I know the best way to create stressed out kids, it's really easy. You just surround them with stressed out adults, right? And unfortunately, when we think about the pandemic, right, so many of the adults are stressed out. So many of the adults are anxious right now. And that is creating more stress, more anxiety in the kids. So one of the best things that we can do right now, right, is to manage our own stress as adults, manage our own anxiety as adults, and that actually is going to trickle down to the kids. Mindfulness really is incredibly contagious. So that's the best place that we can start to make a difference, is by managing ourselves. I was reading this article at the beginning of the pandemic that was talking about how do you talk to your kids about the pandemic and deal with their fears, and it was saying, think about when you're on an airplane, which none of us are on probably very much these days, and there's turbulence, right? And the captain gets on, ding, right? Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some turbulence, right? You know, and everyone then kind of calms down. Okay, the engine didn't fall off, right? We're not going to crash. It's just turbulence, right? We're going to drop a few thousand feet. We're going to change our course a little bit, try to avoid the turbulence, right? We'll get you to your destination, maybe a few minutes late, right? But in the meantime, please just stay in your seat. Don't move about the cabin for a while, right? And that's really kind of how we all are in this pandemic, right? We're like the captain. The kids need to see whether if the captain's scared, I don't want to know that the captain is scared, right? I want him to tell me it's just turbulence and we'll be fine. We're just going to be late. That's actually what our kids need. Anxiety is one of the more contagious emotions, and so is stress, especially from adults to kids. And so while we do want to talk to our kids about emotions, this is one that we don't actually want to model as much because it can really start to spread and unsettle our kids. So we want to let them know, even if we do tell them that we are anxious, we do say, yeah, I'm not feeling great, but it's going to be okay. I'm going to keep us safe. We're going to be safe. We're going to come out the other side of this. That's what's so important for kids to hear, right? And so it really starts with learning how to kind of manage ourselves. I saw this meme online recently. It says, never in the history of calming down has anyone ever calmed down by being told to calm down, right? And it's true. What we need to do is learn how first to calm ourselves down, right? And then, right, what we do is this is called co-regulation with the kids, right? Interpersonal neurobiology that Dr. Dan Siegel talks about, right? This is the way actually that we teach our kids to regulate their own emotions and settle themselves down, is by settling ourselves, regulating ourselves first, and then inviting the child, the teenager into that, right? So that's really where we have to start. again and again is with ourselves. So what else can I start to share in terms of like what is mindfulness in terms of how we think about it with kids? Well, I think about mindfulness as being a few different elements. It's about paying attention. We're always telling our kids how to pay attention. We're not teaching them how. It's about being in the here and now, which again means that we're not racing off to the future. We're not getting stuck in the past. And it's about some degree of acceptance and non-judgment of our experience and of ourselves too. And so this here and now thing in particular, I think is really useful when we think about anxiety, again, because of that sort of like anxiety is being stuck in the future. And I think a lot about how I was when I was a teenager. I was actually pretty anxious. Still am a little bit anxious. Yeah, that's probably why I got interested in mindfulness, right? But I would be thinking like, okay, today is Saturday and there's a test coming up next Wednesday, an exam. I'm probably gonna fail the test and then I'm gonna fail school and then I'm gonna, you know, like my parents will disown me. I'm gonna never go to college or get a job. I'll like die alone under a bridge, right? No one's gonna come to my funeral, right? Just like this horror story about the future that is so unlikely to be true, right? So if I stay in the present moment, there's still a test coming up next Wednesday, but how can I act in the present moment that's going to be helpful to me? Right? Well, what I can really do is I can think, well, what can I do? I can make a study plan. I can call a friend. I can get my book out, or I can decide I'm just going to study later, right? But I don't have to tell myself that whole horror story. I can just take action or not take action right now in the here and now. And that's really empowering. Right? So how do we get ourselves into the present? Well, we did that exercise at the beginning, right? The clearing of space. We did a little bit of that grounding, notice the corners, notice the colors, right? And things like that actually are really helpful using our senses. We'll talk about the breath in a few moments, but sometimes the breath for anxious kids can make them a bit more anxious, but we can really use our senses to get into the present moment. Senses and sensations. And so I just want to share a practice that I kind of developed a little acronym for working with kids. And actually I do this with adults as well. It's called the mindful seat practice. And we're going to focus first on senses, sensations, emotions, actions, and thoughts. Why our senses? Well, if I clap my hands like that, we're all present for the sound of that hand clap. Then our mind wanders off again. Right? Our five senses are always in the present, while our thoughts, and what the research actually says too, our thoughts go off to the future, go back to the past. And again, for the anxious kids, it's off to the future. All right, so the mindful seat. I'll invite you again just to find a comfortable posture, just sitting upright. Eyes can be open or closed, whatever you feel comfortable with. I'll ring the bell. You can enjoy the sound of the bell as it fades. And then continuing to notice any other sounds. Sounds far, sounds near. As well as noticing whether your eyes are open or closed. What do you see? Your next sense. And just noticing shapes, shadows, and colors. As you breathe, perhaps noticing in your nose, what is it that you smell right now? Fresh air from outside or lingering smells of food. In your mouth, what tastes are you aware of right now? And what sensations? temperature of the air, the texture, the clothing against your skin, as well as any deeper sensations in your body. And then shifting from sensations toward E for emotions. What emotions are you aware of right now? Curiosity, boredom, sleepiness or agitation, anxiety, peace, sadness, frustration, just welcoming any emotion as it comes. A for actions now. What do you feel like doing with these sensations and emotions? Do you want to run out of the room? Do you want to scratch your nose, take a sip of coffee, stretch, noticing what actions or urges are present? And lastly, what thoughts? What thoughts are present right now? Judgments, plans, just noticing each one as it arises. And I'll ring the bell once more. You can allow your eyes to flutter open again. And if you need to, maybe taking a look around the room, just away from the screen for a moment. Squeezing your muscles, pressing your feet into the ground. Whatever you might need to do in this moment. And bringing yourself back. So that's the mindful seat. S-E-A-T. And again, just bringing us into the present moment. It also helps a kid or an adult for that matter get to know, for those of us who are therapists or cognitive therapists, right, kind of look through our triggers in terms of what's triggering our anxiety, right? It starts with our senses. I see something, I walk into the classroom and it says, there's a pop quiz today, right? I see that with my eyes, right? That then actually becomes a sensation in the body, right? We can often be aware, we feel that tightening in the body, right? When we're anxious, tightening in the chest. And then that turns into an emotion. Oh my gosh, I'm scared, right? A thought, what should I do? Oh my gosh, should I, like what happened? How did I forget this, right? Whatever it might be, right? And that turns into an action or an urge. I'm going to run out of the room screaming. I'm going to sit down and take this test and try not to cry because I'm so scared. Or I've got this. I'm going to quickly look at my notes and handle this, right? It actually helps us to walk through a difficult experience of maybe even an anxiety attack. What was it that triggered it? What in your five senses? What sensations? What were the emotions? What were the thoughts? And then what did you feel like doing? Right? You burst into tears, right? Or you ran away. Well, what else could you maybe do? What other choice could you make in that moment? Right? So mindfulness being paying attention to the present moment. This gets us into the present moment, right? With acceptance and non-judgment. And the acceptance and non-judgment piece, I think, is also really important. It's learning for kids to not judge themselves quite so harshly, to accept themselves on a different level, and also learning how to really not believe. There's a bumper sticker that you see in the US sometimes that says, don't believe everything you think. And learning that our thoughts are actually just thoughts, right? So sometimes it can be useful, like, for a child that's anxious or a teenager that's anxious, right? Like, I'm gonna never get into university, right? That's an anxious thought that probably a lot of the kids that we work with or live with have, right? Well, that's just a thought. Well, what do you mean that's just a thought? Well, write that down right now. I'm never gonna get into university. Okay, and now in front of that, I want you to write the words, I'm having the thought that I'm never going to get into university. This is from acceptance and commitment therapy. And it's also from Carol Dweck's work on mindsets, actually. I'm having the thought that I'll never get into university. I'm having the thought that I'll never make any friends. I'm having the thought that I won't be able to pass this test, right? So sometimes even just asking kids, like, let's talk about what are some of your fears? What are some of your biggest anxieties? I'll never get married. No one will ever love me. I'll never make friends. I'll never make the soccer team. Thought. I'm having the thought that I'll never make the soccer team. I'm having the thought that I'll never make any friends. That's a really kind of empowering little trick. And right, if you're an educator and you're sitting with a kid and they're saying, I'll never be able to do this math, right? Reminding them of that. If you're a parent, right, and your kid's there so upset, so anxious about something, you're having the thought that whatever, right? Or if you're the doctor, or if you're the educator, the therapist, it's really, really empowering. This just like, I'm having the thought that. People sometimes call this mindfulness without meditation because it helps us to not believe all of these thoughts that are creating our anxiety. But of course, there is, so much kind of, going on in terms of anxiety with our kids. And there's so many things that they, are worried about that make sense to worry about, right? A lot of our kids, they worry about a few things. Some students of mine actually sent me this meme. It says the student paradox: you can pick two. You can have good grades and good friends, but then you have no sleep. You have good friends and good sleep, but you're failing all your classes. You have good grades and good sleep, but then you have no friends, and doing all three is impossible. This is how so many of our kids feel, right? And then on top of it, right, you add in, right, pandemics, and you add in climate change, and you add in, financial collapse, and, millions of jobs being lost, right, from their parents, or, all these other things that are very real that our kids might be worrying about. And how can we help them with this stuff? We know what's happening is that it really is starting to stress them out, and that stress is only making their anxiety worse. And I'd like to do another exercise together, which is I'm just going to ask you to just hold your hands out like this and just start by making really tight fists. And notice what happens when you do this to your breath and to your body, to your mind. Does it feel open or closed? And then just let go. Notice what it's like to let go. And then just kind of collapse over in your seat like this. Again, noticing your breath, your body, your mind. Does it feel awake or asleep? And then sitting up a bit more in the middle, just palms up like this, not too tight, not too loose. Breath, body, mind. You can just put one hand over the other and just rest these both over your heart for a moment. Same few questions. And you can just put your hands back down again. So these are a few, what I'm having us do in our bodies is notice a few different ways that we respond to stress. Right? And stress is not necessarily bad, right? It can be really useful, right? Thousands of years ago, right? Our ancestors are getting chased by saber-toothed tigers. And what do you want to do if there's a tiger chasing you, right? You probably want to flee. You want to run away, right? That's the flight response. Or maybe you want to try to fight it off. That's the fight response. Or maybe you just freeze, hide, right? That's useful. Or maybe you just kind of say, forget it and give up, right? And this system has really kept us safe from saber-toothed tigers, but it doesn't really help us when it comes to exams or social stresses or these other things that are on our kids' minds, right? And what happens over time is that fight response, which is more of this is the fight or flight response. You can feel it in your body and in your brain too, right? this turns into more aggression and kids getting irritable and nasty. Or the flight response, right? Avoiding things. Over time, what starts to happen is that only makes anxiety even worse. The more we avoid something, the bigger the anxiety about it gets. Actually reinforces it, right? So that's not very helpful. That's making our anxiety worse. And then that kind of freeze response, that's more like a post-traumatic stress dissociation kind of response. And that just forget it, giving up. Those are kids that are becoming depressed, right? But it's that flight response, right, that's often really kind of what's happening with our anxiety. So if you think about what was your body like, right? Well, it probably was hard to breathe. Your breath got tight and shallow. Some of your muscles started to clench up, then your other muscles started to clench up. So this is useful when we think, how do I know when I'm anxious? Well, you're clenching your muscles, right? Ding. Is your breath dysregulated? Ding. Right? This actually helps kids and teenagers recognize when they're stressed out. They don't often even know. What else is happening? You know, well, how well could you think? Could you do well on one of your exams if you're like this? Probably not. In fact, in your brain, not a lot's getting in and not a lot's getting back out again. Why is that? Well, the more ancient part of your brain, the fight or flight system, is located in the amygdala, in the limbic system. This is very broad brush strokes, kind of neuroscience here. In the amygdala, this ancient part of your brain, the alarm system, the blood flows in there. And when it's flowing in there, it's flowing out of the rest of your brain. It's flowing out of the prefrontal cortex, right behind your forehead, where you think things through, where you manage your impulses, where you regulate your attention, part of where you can plan for the future, see the long-term picture, think in more realistic ways, take perspective on situations. It also shuts down this other part of the brain over here. The blood flows out of the insular cortex, which is where a lot of our social reasoning takes place. Social understanding, perspective taking, and emotion regulation over here, because the blood is flowing into that alarm system. So what does this mean? This means that the more anxious we are, the more anxious we become, and kids start seeing everything almost as a threat. Or we do when we're anxious too, we're stressed out. That teacher is just they're out to get me. My parents are trying to ruin my life, right? Everything's gonna end up terrible. We get into those anxiety spirals, our kids really do, right? And things only get worse. We actually see things differently. We hear different sounds the more anxious and stressed out we are, right? And we tend to err on the side of everything is a danger. And that only makes things worse, right? Body and our bodies, as I said, right? Our muscles clench, breath gets tight, digestive system starts to shut off, because if you're being chased by a tiger, your energy doesn't need to go to your digestive system, right? So then that's why we get stomach aches, right? And muscle cramps and irritable bowel syndrome. The immune system shuts off because, you know, again, this is why we get sick more often when we're stressed or when we're anxious, right? And we see a lot of somatic symptoms in our kids with a lot of anxiety because these systems are getting shut down, right? We even actually crave different foods. If there's a lion chasing you, you probably want sugar and salt and fat, right? Because that stores energy and gives you, you know, energy to do more running away from the situation. You're probably not craving healthy food like kale, right? So what we want to do, right, is just be aware of the ways that stress and anxiety are then impacting all of these systems. Right? Other things are actually happening too. Cortisol, the stress hormone, that's flowing through us. And that blocks the receptors for oxytocin, which is the hormone that helps us feel safe and connected, that we experience, that gets released when we're falling in love, that gets released when we're caring for our kids, connecting with other people, right? This is why we, you know, our kids get kind of grumpy and nasty when they're stressed out or when they're anxious. Right? Now, the good news is we have these other ways of responding to stress too. We did fight or flight, what we might call freeze or faint or freeze and forget it. We also have the attend and befriend responses, or I might call these also mindfulness and compassion and self-compassion. And that's what we're talking about here today, right? These are almost the opposite of that fight, flight, freeze, forget it response, right? They shut down the amygdala, that ancient part of the brain, right? Where the alarm system is going off. So blood is not flowing into the alarm system. Now blood is flowing into the prefrontal cortex right here, where I think things through, I make my decisions, I manage my impulses, I can focus for the long term, I can think about the big picture. Blood is now flowing into the insular cortex. I can take other people's perspective. I can recognize and regulate my emotions. That teacher is a tough teacher, but they're not trying to ruin my life, right? I can take some different perspective on the situation. Okay, even if I did fail the test, it's not the end of the world, right? So this is really empowering. In our bodies, when we're in mindfulness and compassion or self-compassion, right? What is it that starts to happen? I'm going to close the window shade here because I'm getting a lens flare. There, now you can see me a little bit better, right? What was I saying, right? Our breath becomes a little bit more regular and even. Digestive system, immune system, these all start working again, right? All these other changes start to happen. The cortisol shuts down, which means oxytocin can start to flow, right? In fact, even just this posture of putting our hands over our heart, this actually really starts to settle down the nervous system. It's what I often suggest to kids before bed. If you're feeling really anxious, just put your hands over your heart, give yourself a little hug as you're laying down in bed. Really helps turn off that fight or flight response, just physically. Breath is also a bit more regular and even when we're in more of the attend and befriend. Excuse me, got the hiccups. So these are just, again, let me throw this on the share screen as well. Our brains and our bodies, right? Start craving different foods again. And I just want to be clear, it's not that attend and befriend is good and fight or flight is bad. These are really useful for different situations. The problem comes when we get stuck because we start to rewire our brains, and kids' brains start to rewire so that they avoid and they become anxious all the time, right? They fight and they get more aggressive all the time, right? And then we see as kids go off to university, actually one of the books I'm working on now is a book about mental health in college and university time, right? Is that we see kids really start to fall apart with more and more mental health issues as they get older. So it's learning how to disrupt that cycle of fight or flight so that they don't rewire their brains just to be more anxious all the time. Now, I want to turn now toward breathing and breath work and looking at some ways we can use the breath to help us, to help our kids start to regulate ourselves a little bit more effectively. You probably noticed when you were like this, your breath is either shallow or dysregulated, or you weren't taking full breaths, right? So actually our breath is a really useful barometer of how and what we're feeling. And we know that your breath is both, it's voluntary and it's involuntary. You can actually regulate your breath. And when you regulate your breath, that regulates your body and your nervous system and your brain. And in turn, your attention, your impulses, and your emotions. And this is really empowering for kids to hear. Wait, so I can use my breath almost like a remote control to shut off, or maybe even just turn the volume down in that alarm system in my brain? Yes, that's exactly, in fact, what your breath can do. Really, really powerfully. And what, oh my gosh, blanking on her name. I can see her face blanking on her name, Irish name. Oh my gosh, this woman who studies the stress response. She's at Stanford. Oh gosh, I'm blanking. Anyway, what she's found is that actually if we regulate our breath down to about 4 to 6 breaths in a minute, right, which is not very many breaths, a breath every 10 or 15 seconds. That's what turns off the fight or flight response. That's what activates the prefrontal cortex, gets the blood flowing out of the limbic system and amygdala into the prefrontal cortex, into the insular cortex, into all these parts of the brain that we want to have work for long-term focus, for better emotion regulation, for better attention regulation, all of that. Kelly McGonigal, that's the name I was trying to think of. Right? So how can we then start to regulate our breath and teach this to our teenagers to use their breath like a remote control? And I just want to share a few ways that we can use this, and then maybe I'll shift to talking about getting kids engaged, and then we can talk a bit more with a more open Q&A and discussion. So one of the things that we really want to do, one of the easiest ways that we can start to slow our breath down a bit is just to extend that exhale. That's actually what's really key, is a somewhat longer exhale than inhale. So for example, just counting can be useful. The 7-11 breath. We can just do this together, just breathing in for 7, breathing back out for 11. Let's try this together. If you like, you can also breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, if that helps you focus. Just breathing in, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Back out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And in, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And just breathe in yourself counting. And back out. In. And back out. I'll ring the bell once more. And you can just let go of the count and just really just let your breath go back to, right, a new pace, maybe a bit more regulated. Again, well-regulated breath, probably well-regulated brain at the same time. Right? So the 7-11 breath can be really powerful for something like anxiety, stopping a panic attack. Some of the kids I work with, I work as a therapist, clinical psychologist, right? They get referred to me, and, you know, because they're experienced panic or they experience anxiety, and they get to my office. And if I say something like, so your mom says you've got anxiety, right? They're often like, no, I don't, I'm fine, right? So figuring out how do we then work with that, and some, you know, there's a few different ways. You know, sometimes I'll you know, try to find something that makes them anxious. Often public speaking. Okay, well, here's something that can help with public speaking. Or sometimes it's even like, okay, maybe you don't get anxious, but one of 3 of your friends is going to have an anxiety attack by the time you're done with university. Here's a little psychological first aid that you can teach your friend when they're having a panic attack. This is the 7-11 breath, but we better try it ourselves together, right? And so, you know, again, then, you know, teaching them this 7-11 breath trick, right? And the 7-11, you know, it's just easy to remember. There's 7-Elevens everywhere. Whenever you walk by a 7-Eleven, do a 7-11 breath, right? Something like that. It can be 3 and 6. It can be 4, 7, and 8, right? It can be, you know, just something that helps the kids to focus, right? And ideally extending that exhale. a little bit again is what starts to settle the nervous system down. So that's the 7-11 breath. Another one, again, kind of for younger kids, but I actually use with teenagers a lot, the hot chocolate breath, which I don't know what would be a good Singapore equivalent, some good soup or chicken and rice or something like that. I just remember the food being so good when I was in Singapore 10 years ago. Curry noodles, right? Imagine that you're holding like a cup of tea or coffee or hot chocolate, whatever it might be, soup, and you're just breathing and smelling and blowing out, cooling off. Breathe in, smelling. Blowing out, cooling off. Breathe in, smelling. Blow out, cooling off. So again, it's just kind of tapping into the imagination in some ways to help kids just to focus, help kids to settle their breath down a little bit. So just another thought there. There are other things that our kids are probably already doing and that we adults are often doing that are actually breath regulation practices that we're not even aware of, like a sigh, for example, like, right? That's actually a way that we let out frustration. It's a way that we release anxiety. And a sigh is a way of breathing, right? That's in fact all it is. It's extending that exhale out. So actually teaching kids how to sigh, or what I often do actually is teach the teenagers more of the silent sigh. In America, right, kids are often very kind of rude and sarcastic, and they kind of sigh at you, right? In Singapore, I'm sure the kids are much more polite, but maybe that the folks in Australia or other parts of the region have less polite kids, like we do in America. So I'll teach kids, you can do a silent sigh. Just breathe in. And then just long, silent sigh, slow, steady exhale, just pressing all of the air all the way out, down to the bottom of your breath. And then just letting your breath reset itself. Right? Another simple thing that, again, no one, especially the more self-conscious teenagers, they don't have to know, right? No one else in their class has to know that they're doing a silent sigh or that they're doing a 7-11 breath. Another one I learned recently that I thought was really interesting from a guy named Fleet Mall is who I learned this from. Just actually, if you just put your hands behind your head like this, this actually stretches out your whole body, your whole nervous system, stretches out what's called the vagus nerve, which is really important in the fight or flight response and in anxiety. Just try putting your hands behind your head like this, as you might already do at different points in your life, right? And notice that this automatically slows your breath down. You can't not breathe deeply, and you can't not breathe slowly, right? When you're in this position. It's just another really simple thing to teach to kids, especially those teenagers, right? They can lean back during the test and stretch their bodies, do this, a few breaths, right? Actually, when I was taking my licensing exam for psychology, I don't know, 15 years ago or whenever, right? I remember like leaning back from the computer, because it was on the computer, and just letting my body stretch, take a long breath, and then lean back in, right? So when kids are doing their exams, this is a good one, right, to think about doing. So these are a few ways that we can use the breath. to help help our kids. There's that one there. Right. So let me why don't I just do a little review of the science here, and then we'll start to shift back to questions and have a little bit of a discussion. So, right, what's really exciting about mindfulness, and I think we'll hear about this a lot this weekend. I know my friend Sarah Lazar is going to be talking a lot about what's happening in our brains as we practice mindfulness. But this idea of neuroplasticity, that our brains actually grow and respond like a muscle in relation to what we're doing. And this cuts both ways, right? The more we avoid things, as I said, the more anxious we'll make ourselves, right? The more angry we get, the more angry we'll get. The more stressed we are, the more stressed we'll get, unless we disrupt that process, which also means that the more we practice mindfulness, the more we see some incredible changes in the brain, right? And this idea that neurons that fire together wire together, and which are the parts of the brain that change most, that are most important with anxiety anyway? Well, we see some growth in gray matter, and Sarah will talk about the fear response actually too. She did this study. I mean, you should go see her. I'm just re-describing her own studies. The prefrontal cortex, where we think things through, where we focus in the long term, where we regulate our attention, right? Where we solve complex problems, where we plan for the future, where we take perspective, that part of the brain starts to grow new connections. The insular cortex, back here, where a lot of our social reasoning takes place and emotion regulation, that also starts to grow new gray matter, right? And I say those in particular because for kids, those are a couple of the things they care the most about. Can I focus in school? Well, that part of your brain, that'll get bigger if you practice mindfulness. They care a lot about, they care a lot about their social lives. Well, that part of their brain too. Mindfulness is not going to make them popular. I'm not going to say that, although maybe, who knows, right? But that social stuff is really important to teenagers too, right? And then what part of the brain is getting smaller and less active? It's that amygdala. It's that limbic system. The amygdala, which is bigger and more active in people with post-traumatic stress, bigger and more active in people with anxiety, that's actually getting smaller and less dense the more we practice mindfulness. That's really incredible, right? And if you think about it, right, if the amygdala is like an alarm system, it's like living in a house where the smoke alarm goes off when you just burn the toast or something, right? Anxiety is like having an alarm that goes off at all the wrong times. So what we're trying to do is reset, recalibrate that alarm so it goes off when it's supposed to go off. Not just when there's a pop quiz, but when there's actually a real danger, right? When a bus pulls in front of you, right? And so mindfulness helps us to reshape the brain really in these ways that are going to be empowering for kids, especially those more anxious kids. There's thousands and thousands of studies now on mindfulness, a lot about stress and anxiety in particular, right? And so many other ways that we can help, our kids, even just through simple practices. Why don't we do maybe 2 more practices, and then I'll open it up for questions. Another practice I find really helpful for myself is just noticing sounds. Again, getting into our senses. I'll just invite you to sit upright once more. Eyes can close if you like. I'll ring the bell. Just see if you can listen all the way to the end of the bell. And then just continuing to listen. Maybe what's the farthest away sound that you can hear? Outside of the building, birds or traffic. Coming a bit closer, sounds inside the building. elevators, air conditioning, footsteps. Closer still, sounds nearby, the sound of your own breath, creaking of your chair. Even sounds inside your body. Can you hear your heartbeat or the blood rushing past your ears, stomach growling? Can you even hear the sound of your own thoughts? Is that possible? And then back outward again, maybe noticing sounds from the left or from the right, from in front of you or from behind, from above or from below. And I'll just ring the bell once more. And again, just listening for the beginning, middle, and end sound of the bell. And allowing your eyes to open when you can no longer hear it. So again, this just brings us right into the present. Noticing those sounds from the left or the right, in front, behind, right? When kids feeling anxious and their thoughts are going all over the place, this kind of gathers them, right? They're thinking about the car outside. Where's that going, right? What kind of bird is that that's chirping over there? Right? Just gently guide them back in. This is often actually how I start a session with kids. Again, especially when breathing is going to be more agitating for some kids. Another thing, I kind of mentioned this idea of public speaking being a place where kids get anxious. And I used to hate public speaking. Now I love public speaking. But I would talk about it as, you know, if you think about public speaking and you're in a room, you know, say I was in Singapore, I was like, wish I was, oh my gosh, right? And in a big auditorium or something like that, looking out at a sea of, what have we got, about 400 people right now. And if you think about a caveman with their back to the wall of a cave and 400 people or hyenas looking at them, right? They're gonna get anxious. They're gonna go into fight or flight, right? That's not gonna end well for them, right? So how do we settle ourselves down? Oh, it's just a bunch of nice teachers and doctors and parents, right? How do I get myself a bit more into my body? Well, I have a friend who says, if anxiety is in your head, what's the farthest place from your head, right? It's in your feet. So taking a moment just to focus on the sensations in our feet. This I find really helps me settle before public speaking. I wish I'd known this about test taking. This is a great one for test taking, for a social situation. I'll just ring the bell. Breathing in and following your awareness all the way down to the soles of your feet. And just noticing, are your feet warm or cool? Are they dry or are they damp? Are your shoes tight or loose? Your socks comfortable or uncomfortable? And just gently pressing your feet into your socks, into your shoes, feeling your shoes on the floor in the building, and the building in the ground, rooted in the earth. And allowing your eyes to open back up again. So just another really quick grounding practice. And it's kind of at the edges of our body. Sometimes anxiety, right? Or if a kid's got some bad experiences physically, focusing too much on their body really deeply can be more agitating. But the edges of our body, like just feeling our feet, right? That can actually be really settling and grounding. We can also become more aware of the sensations in our body and what they might be signaling to us. I have a friend who's an actor, and he taught me a trick actually for public speaking that's great for sports or great for kind of performance-oriented things for kids too. He said, well, what actors do is when we feel nervous, we just turn that into excitement. Because if you think about it, all the physiological signs of anxiety are the same as excitement. Your heart is pounding, your hands are sweating, right? You start to breathe heavily. Like if you're going up a roller coaster, right? Is it anxiety or excitement? Then you start going down the roller coaster, it turns into fun and excitement, and it's still the same. Your body feels the same. You've just decided this is fun and exciting rather than this is scary and anxious and terrifying. Somehow your brain is just flipped. And can you get it to do that before you have to go and perform in a concert, or before the soccer game, or before the netball game, or before the college, university interview or job interview? Can you just flip that into excitement rather than anxiety? Just see it as excitement to perform. So these are just a few kinds of ideas about thinking about anxiety, the ways that it gets created in our kids, right? In the kind of pressure cooker environment, that they're often in, and the ways that we can start to help them manage a little bit more, just disrupt that, their anxiety, their stress is going up and up and up. Right? Find a moment, right? Before your exam, feel your feet on the ground. Gets more and more anxious, right? Find a moment, right? When you're in the locker room before the soccer game to do some 7-Eleven breaths, right? Reduce that anxiety. Goes back up again, right? Find a moment while you're waiting for the subway, for the metro, right? To just simply notice sounds and then bring it back down again, so that we're training ourselves and helping our kids train their anxiety to be more regulated throughout the day, right? And then they can start to carry that with them, a little bit less agitated all the time, and then they're practicing this. So then in that really anxious moment, they can access it, right? And that's what this is really about. So, these little moments that we all have in the day, right? First thing in the morning, last thing at night, waiting in line before diving into reading and writing, right? All of these little moments, right? Or anytime we feel that urge to grab our phone, that's a moment. Take 3 breaths, notice 3 sounds, feel your feet on the ground, right? And then go ahead and check your phone. I use check your phone because it's something we and our kids do, right? Just dozens of times a day.
With that, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. And thank you very much, Chris, for a wonderful, wonderful talk and Q&A. So good evening, good morning to you, and have a good weekend ahead. Thank you, everyone, and see you all soon. Take care.
Thank you all. Please stay in touch if you have any questions. Thank you again for facilitating, Dr. Wern. Thank you.